Hello everyone. Today we are going to explore a fascinating chapter, tribes, nomads and settled communities. This topic is not just about history but also about how different social structures evolved in India. For UPSC and UPPSC, it is extremely important because it connects history, society and polity together. So let's dive in. First is little bit we should know the background. In more regions, the Varna rules defined society. Brahmins prescribed the rules, rulers enforced them, and inequality deepened. Under Delhi Sultans and Mughals, hierarchy got sharper, and the social gap widened, meaning high versus low, rich versus poor. In the past, questions have been asked from this topic, like in UPSC Mains 2013, a question was asked like discuss the major social changes in India during the Sultanate and Mughal period. And in 2019, in UPPCS, it was asked examine the role of religion and social stratification in shaping medieval Indian society. So my tip is to always connect Delhi Sultanate and Mughals with reinforcement of hierarchy through administration, revenue, and patronage of elite. Next topic is beyond big cities, tribal societies. India was and still is incredibly diverse. Alongside caste-based society, there were tribal societies that followed a very different model. They did not always accept Brahminical rituals or caste hierarchy. Their unity came from kinship bonds, not Varna rules. Many lived in forest, hills, desert, and remote regions, areas difficult for kings to directly control. They practiced shifting agriculture, hunting gathering, animal rearing, and in some cases, settled cultivation. Tribal land was held collectively and distributed among households according to local customs. Some tribes were nomadic, moving as per resource availability. So essentially, they represented an alternative model of society. Now, here comes the interesting part. Tribal groups and caste based societies interacted in two ways, meaning there were frequent clashes when kingdom tried to extend control into tribal areas for revenue, resources, or territorial expansion. And it was also dependence. There was also dependence. At the same time, both dependent on each other. Tribes supplied forest produce, cattle, and other resources, while caste-based societies provided manufactured goods, iron tools, or market networks. So this relationship of conflict and dependence led to gradual change on both sides. Many tribes later evolved into regional kingdom, while caste society absorbed certain tribal groups into its fold. So as an aspirant, why does this matter for you? Because questions on social transformation in medieval India often test your ability to connect political history with everyday lives of people. Prelims may ask direct questions like which of the following statement about tribal societies are true. In mains, you may get analytical question like discuss the interaction between caste-based and tribal society in medieval India. So who were tribal people? Now let's study tribal people and nomadic communities in medieval India. This is another UPPCS relevant extract from medieval India dealing with the tribal societies, nomads and mobile communities. For exam prep, you need to understand who they were, their way of life, their interaction with states and why they matter in social economic history. Now, tribal people lived across almost every region of the subcontinent. Unlike the caste-based society, most tribes did not maintain written record. Instead, they preserved oral tradition and custom. Historians today rely on these traditions to reconstruct tribal histories. Now let's map some important tribes for our exam. Now in the western Himalayas, Gaddis were a prominent tribal society. They were mainly shepherd. Now in the northeast, Nagas, Ahoms, and Khasis controlled entire region. In Jharkhand, Bihar, Odisha, and Bengal, these regions, Cheros, Mundas, Santhals. I remember Raja Man Singh defeated the Cheros in 1591. Now Maharashtra and Karnataka, this area, Berats, Koragas, Maravars, Kolis, and in the central India, Bhils. In the Bhils, some stayed hunter-gatherer, while some became agriculturists and even zamindars. Now in central India, Goons across the Chhattisgarh, and they are also in some part of Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Andhra. So these groups were spread everywhere, not marginal but mainstream in their areas. Now, apart from tribes, medieval India also has nomadic and mobile communities. They lived by herding animals and moved long distances in search of pastures. Moving from settled tribes to mobile ones, nomadic pastoralists dependent on milk and animal products. They traded wool, ghee, meat for food, grains, cloth, metal utensils. They were constantly on the move, connecting different regions. And then came the Banjaras, the superstar of medieval trade. Now their caravan, which is called Tanda, could be of thousands of bullocks strong. Alauddin Khalji used them to supply grain to market. Jahangir's memoir mention their grain trade. The Mughal army relied heavily on them. Sometimes a single companion had 1 lakh bullocks of grain transported by Banjaras. This made them not just trader, but the logistical backbone of medieval India. The story of India was shaped not just by the kings, but also by Bhils, Gons, Banjaras, Nagas, Santhal, and countless others who contributed to the economy, trade, and cultural diversity. Now let's answer one question which is given here after reading the passage. Now the question is, find out how grain is transported from village to cities at present. In what ways is this similar to or different from the ways in which Banjaras functioned? Now, from village to cities, grains are collected from farmers through mandis, regulated market, and APMC. They are transported by trucks, lorries, trains, and sometimes ships from long distances. They are managed by government agencies like FCI, FATE, State Warehousing Corporation, and private traders. Grain is stored in godowns or silos before being transported to wholesale and retail market. Now, technology like GPS, cold storage, logistic chains makes transportation faster and more efficient. Now, in medieval times, when the grain transportation was done by Banjaras, they moved in large caravans, meaning tandas, with thousands of oxen. They carried not just grain but their entire families and household. They worked both as independent trader and sometimes hired carriers. They bought grain in surplus area and sold it in deficient area. They traveled short distance daily, meaning 6 to 7 miles around, and dependent on natural grazing land for oxen. They were flexible and mobile without permanent settlement. So now what are the similarities? Their core function is same, meaning they move the grain from surplus to deficit areas. They both act as intermediaries between producers and consumers. Both are crucial for economy, meaning they support armies, markets, and cities. Now, let's look at the differences. There are several aspects in which they are different. Like if we take the mode of transportation, Banjaras mainly used oxen-driven caravans, but in present-day transport is trucks, trains, and ships. Now, the organization was kinship-based families, semi-nomadic, and now it is state agencies, private companies, and contract. Now, in the Banjaras, the storage was mainly open field and temporary. Now we store food in silos, warehouse, and cold storage. And there are many other differences. One difference can be on dependence, meaning their animals dependent on natural grazing. Now we need fuel, roads, and railways, etc., for transporting the grain from one place to another place. While both systems ensure the flow of grains from villages to cities, modern logistics is mechanized, faster, and managed by supply chain professionals. And now the technology is much more advanced, unlike the Banjaras, which was slower, family based, and animal driven caravans. Now let's look at changing society, new caste, and hierarchies. As the economy expanded, new skills and new occupation were needed. This gave rise to new jatis within Varnas. For example, artisans like smiths, carpenter, masons, they were recognized as distinct jatis. Slowly, it was jati, not varna, that became the main organizing principle of society. Now, among the Kshatriya, the rise of the Rajput is a turning point. Lineages like the Hunas, Chandelas, Chalukyas, many of them tribal originally, became recognized as Rajput and established powerful state. They used their agriculture wealth to build kingdom. This set an example. Tribal chief could rise in status if they aligned with the Brahmanical order. But note, only elite tribal families joined the ruling class, while the majority of tribes were absorbed into the lower jatis. In contrast, in regions like Punjab, Sindh, and the northwest, many tribes converted to Islam early. They outright rejected the caste system, showing that the Hindu caste hierarchy was not universally accepted across India. Now we are moving into the state formation among tribes, part of the chapter. Let's see how tribal people were not just forest dweller but also builders of powerful state. Now first tribe is Gonds. Now Gond lived in forested region called Gondwana. Gonds are located around here. Now they practiced shifting cultivation, moving from one patch of land to another. So society was organized in clans with fairly equal social relations. Now with the decline of Delhi Sultanate, Gond clans united into bigger kingdom. The most famous was Gara Katanga, mentioned in the Akbarnama as controlling 70,000 villages. Now their administration was structured. Gad was ruled by Gond clan. It was divided into Chaurasi, meaning 84 villages, and it was further divided into Barhots, meaning 12 villages each. Now this shows a clear shift from tribal leadership to monarchies influenced by Hindu kingdom. Now there were some social changes among the Gonds. As Gond rulers grew powerful, society became more stratified. Land was granted to Brahmins. Gond rulers tried to be recognized as Kshatriya. Now, like Aman Das took the royal title Sangram Shah. His son Dalpat married Rajput princess Durgavati. Now Rani Durgavati, she was a warrior queen. After Dalpat's death, Rani Durgavati ruled for her young son Bir Narayan. She was a skilled leader who expanded her kingdom. In 1565, Mughal general Asaf Khan attacked. She fought bravely, but rather than surrendering, she chose death in battle, becoming a symbol of courage. Now her son Bir Narayan also died defending the kingdom. So the question is why the Mughals wanted the Gondwana. Now the Gondwana was rich in forest, fertile land and resources. Its central location controlled routes between north, south, west India. Conquering it secured Mughal borders in central India. It allowed expansion further south. Now defeating Rani Durgavati was also a political statement of Mughal power. Shows us how tribal society could evolve into kingdom by adopting certain customs for status and fiercely resist imperial expansion. Their story is a reminder of both adaptation and resistance in Indian history. Now one question which is given here, discuss why the Mughals were interested in the land of Gonds. Now the Mughals wanted to take control of the land of Gonds because it was very important for many reasons. It was full of forest, like we already discussed, fertile soil, plenty of crops. This meant it could provide a lot of food and valuable things that the Mughal needed to support their big empire and army. Now Gondwana was right in the middle of India and controlled important roads that connected the north to the south and west. If the Mughals controlled this area, they could protect these trade routes and make sure goods moved safely across the empire. The Gond, especially under leaders like Rani Durgavati, were strong and independent. The Mughals wanted to bring all parts of India under their rule. So conquering Gondwana was necessary to stop any challenges to their power. Now what was the military advantage? Taking over Gondwana helped the Mughals secure their border in central India and made it easier for them to expand further south into other kingdoms. Now defeating a brave leader like Rani Durgavati was also important for the Mughals to show that they were powerful and could defeat even the toughest opponent. In short, the Mughals wanted the Gond land because it was rich, well placed and ruled by a strong leader who resisted them. Controlling it helped the Mughals grow stronger and keep their empire united. Now the next tribe is Ahoms. The Ahom migrated to the Brahmaputra Valley in Assam from what is now Myanmar during the 13th century. They overthrew the local landlords called Bunyas and gradually built a powerful kingdom. In the 16th century, they expanded their territory by annexing neighboring region and like Koch Hajo in 1581, while also bringing several local tribes under their control to strengthen their power. The Ahoms were early adopters of firearms starting in the 1530. By the 1660, they had developed the ability to produce high quality gunpowder and cannons. 1662, the Mughal general Mir Jumla invaded and defeated the Ahoms temporarily, but the Mughal hold was short-lived, showing the strong resistance and resilience of the Ahom people. Their administration was based on a forced labor system called the pack system. A census was conducted to assign pack duties, and villages had to send workers, known as packs, on a rotational basis for military service and public works. This system also led to resettling people from crowded areas to less populated ones, which sometimes disrupted clan unity. By the 17th century, the home administration became more centralized. All adult males were required to serve in the army during the wartime. In peacetime, they worked on building dams, irrigation system, and other public infrastructure. The Ahoms also introduced advanced rice cultivation technique, which helped increase agriculture productivity. Socially, the Ahom society was divided into clans called khels, each managing several villages. There were very few artisans caste within their society, so artisans were often brought in from neighboring kingdoms. Land was controlled by the community, and even the king could not redistribute it without the community's approval. Religiously, the Ahoms originally worshipped their tribal god. However, over time, especially during the reign of Sip Singh, Brahmanical influences grew stronger. Land was granted to temples and Brahmins, and Hinduism became the dominant religion, though many traditional beliefs continued to be practiced alongside it. The Ahom supported cultural activities like scholarship, poetry, and theatre. They translated important Sanskrit texts into their local languages. Their historical record, known as the Buranjis, were written in both Ahoms and Assamese and remain valuable source of regional history. The Ahoms exemplify state formation through military conquest, ethnic integration, and technological adaptation. Their pack system is a unique labor model of medieval India. The Ahoms resistance to the Mughals and the gradual cultural assimilation into Hinduism highlight the plurality of the Indian society. Their contribution to Assamese culture and history are crucial in understanding the development of northeastern India. Now let's start with the exercise. Gad, Gada, Katanga, a large Gond kingdom. Tanda, Caravan. Caravan was Banjaras or traders moved in. They moved in caravans called tandas. Now laborers, pack. They worked under the Ahom pack system. Now the clan is Khel. Ahom society was organized into clan called Khels. Now the next is Sip Singh. Sip Singh was from Ahom state. He was the ruler who promoted Brahmanical Hinduism. Now Durgavati was from Gadakatanga. She was a Rajput queen who ruled the Gond kingdom after Dalpat. Now next is the fill in the blanks. The first one is new caste emerging within the Varnas were called Jatis. Now Buranjis were historical works written by the Ahoms. Now the Akbarnama mentions that Kadakatanga had 70,000 villages. As tribal state became bigger and stronger, they gave land grants to Brahmins and temples. Now next is state whether true or false. First is tribal society had a rich oral tradition, which is true. They preserve history, stories and custom through oral tales, songs and folklore. Now the next is there were no tribal communities in the northwestern part of the subcontinent, which is false. Tribes like Khokhars, Gakhars and Balochi clans lived in the northwest. The Chaurasi in the Gond state contained several cities, which is false. Chaurasi was an administrative unit of 84 villages, not cities. The Wheels lived in the northeastern part of the subcontinent, which is wrong. The Wheels lived in the western and central India, not the northeast. Now the next is what kind of exchanges took place between nomadic pastoralists and settled agriculturists. Now the exchange between nomadic pastoralists and settled agriculturists were in the medieval India. They dependent on each other, creating a network of mutual exchange. Now, if we talk about economic exchange, pastoralists supplied wool, ghee, milk, meat, hides, and animal products. Agriculturists provided grains, pulses, vegetables, cloth, and metal tools in return. This barter system created interdependence and supported both lifestyle. Now, if we talk about services, pastoralists use their herds, oxen, bullocks, camels for plowing, irrigation, and transporting goods. Their mobility also allowed them to act as traders, carrying surplus produce across region. Now, if we talk about cultural and social interaction between goods, there was a flow of ideas, tradition, and practices. Sometimes relation turned hostile, but generally they encouraged cooperation and integration of tribal and agrarian societies. Now, this question tells how well you can link economic history with social processes. It is how was the administration of the Ahom state organized? The administration of Ahom state was highly organized, combining monarchy, aristocratic council, and the efficient military and social system. The king, which was called Swardev, was the supreme authority, supported by powerful counselor and a unique pack system for administration and military organization. The king sat at the apex and was assisted by the three chief counselors called Gohens, and a council of nobles and ministers who advised but did not undermine royal authority. There was a system of checks and balances with about 12 fukans and 20 baruas from hereditary nobility overseeing civil matters and reporting to the king. Now, the fukans were senior officials, often military heads, but also handled civil administration. Now, baruas were officials dealing with economic and revenue function, and they also dealt with trade, agriculture, and household management. Now, administration lacked a written constitution and was based mainly on the traditions and chronicles. Now, let's learn about the pack system. The pack system was a unique form of forced labor and military organization wherein all able-bodied adult males provided service to the state, either in military or public work such as building dams and irrigation system. Officials within the pack system included Bora, who was in charge of 20 packs, Saikia, who was in charge of 100 packs, Hazarika, 1000, and higher officials like Fukans and Baruas. Now, state was divided into administrative units called khels or clans, each controlling several villages. Governors were appointed over frontier regions like Sadia Khoa, Gohen, Marangi Khoa Gohen, Salal Gohen to administer and defend strategic territories. Now, king had supreme judicial and legislative authority, was supported by his court and officials, as there was no strict separation of power. Now, peasants received land from village communities, and even the king could not arbitrarily dispossess them without community approval. Now, the next is what changes took place in Varna-based society. Now, Varna-based society in India underwent significant changes as jatis, meaning smaller caste, emerged. Tribal communities were incorporated and social organizations shifted from Varna to jati basis. Now, smaller caste or jatis developed within the traditional fourfold Varna system, which was occupational specialization, particularly among artisans, smiths, carpenter, and mason, led to their recognition as distinct jatis by Brahmanas. Now, many tribes and social groups were incorporated into the Varna-based society. Now, the jati became the primary basis for organizing society instead of Varna. Now, how did tribal society change after being organized into a state? Now, tribal society underwent major changes after being organized into a state. They became more hierarchical, many tribal elites joined ruling classes. Most common tribal members were absorbed into lower jatis of caste society, resulting in social inequality and integration with mainstream political structure. Now, the next is, were the Banjaras important for the economy? The Banjaras were very important for the economy as they were the most significant traders, nomads in Middle India. They played a crucial role in transporting goods, especially grain, salt, and sugar over long distances, using their large caravan called tandas. They bought grain where it was cheaper and carried it to places where it was in higher demand, thus facilitating trade between rural production centers and urban market. They also transported essential supplies for the Mughal army during military campaign and were often hired by big merchants to carry goods. Their efficient transportation network contributed to the regional and inter-regional economy, reducing the cost and risk of moving goods and maintaining a steady flow of commodities across diverse terrain. In what ways was the history of the Gond different from that of the Ahoms? Were there any similarities? Now, there were many differences. Like if you take the geographical region, the Gond lived in the vast forested region called Gondwana, whereas the Ahoms migrated from present-day Myanmar, Burma, and settled in the Brahmaputra Valley in Assam in northeastern India. Now, Gond practiced shifting cultivation, while the Ahoms did not. The Ahoms used sedentary wet rice cultivation with sophisticated embankment for water control. Now, Gonds were annexed into the Mughal Empire, while the Ahoms resisted Mughal invasion and remained largely independent until British colonial control. The Ahoms extensively used gunpowder, cannons, and firearms in warfare, whereas the Gonds did not develop such military technology significantly. The Ahoms promoted cultural development, rewarding poets and social activists, while such patronage was less evident in Gond history. Now, in the next video, we will start with the next chapter, that is chapter 8, Devotional Path to the Divine. Thank you.